All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday with the Family. My name is Julia Bimbrook, and I am the host of O State TV and have been so excited to work with the Alumni Association on these events on Fridays. We've had some great guests on already, and today is no exception to that. We have the Vice President of Research, Dr. Kenneth Sewell, and he's talking about some really important stuff that's happening at OSU right now related to the COVID-19 pandemic and what they're doing to help. So Dr. Sewell, thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I know very much that the term OSU family, the Cowboy family, is not just a set of words. It's a real thing. So I'm happy to be a part of this gathering.
Absolutely. And I think that you guys right now are living out the land grant mission. We're watching it happen. Why is it so important to jump in right now when the world is needing help and Oklahoma specifically is needing help?
Well, it's really just part of how we all think. It's like we're problem solvers, and most of the time we're solving those problems within our own particular disciplines, whatever that is, whether it's a psychologist or a biologist or a chemist or an engineer solving problems that are kind of in that in the line of their own research. But when something like this comes along, that's a societal problem that cuts across all areas, people start looking for ways that their expertise can have relevance. And this whole crisis has, in many ways, as bad as it is, it's brought out the best in the OSU family. And so we've seen that in all kinds of ways. And I've just gotten the chance to be involved in a few of them specific to our testing lab.
Absolutely. And so, and we'll get into a lot of those details with the diagnostic lab, because I think that's so important and really interesting for people that don't know what's going on. But tell me what your job looks like as the vice president for research on a day-to-day, kind of before all this started.
Before all this, I describe my job as being composed of three different roles. I mean, there is a kind of a generic. I'm an administrator, so there is a generic operational role. There's things about the grants and research grants and the policies and all that we have to keep going. But honestly, we've got really talented people working in the research office that handle almost all of that. So that's part of my purview, that operational side of the research enterprise. But it's not really what I spend my time on most of the time. So I see my time is being spent in kind of three different hats. So my three hats are a cheerleader, quite honestly. And in many ways, that's what I'm on this show doing today, is a cheerleader to tell the story and make sure that the world knows that we have true heroes at OSU doing the research they do and how important that is. But it's also a cheerleader. You know, I used to be a football player, and the cheerleaders are facing the stands. You know, they're getting the crowd all ramped up, but they also helped us a lot out on the field. You know, and so part of that cheerleading role is to make sure that our researchers that are really dedicated, hardworking, brilliant people feel like the superstars that they are, and that they know they're appreciated by the leadership of the university. So that cheerleader role, I take that very seriously, and I don't minimize its importance, both for the world understanding the impact of OSU's research enterprise, but also for our own people and their morale and their energy to do the work they do. So that's one of my hats. The other hat is I'm a matchmaker. So I'm trying to match people with opportunities. Often those opportunities are in the form of dollars. So it's grant dollars or foundations that are willing to support certain kind of things. Sometimes companies that are interested in accessing the expertise of our faculty. But sometimes it's the researchers with each other. That we have two researchers on opposite ends of the campus that have complementary expertise that they've never thought about joining forces. So matchmaker is one of my other roles. And then for good or for bad, my third role is politician. Everything we do is linked in the politics of a big organization like OSU, but also then that organization is embedded within the state and within the nation, and our access to resources and our ability to to be viewed in the appropriate light to get those resources has a political element. And so I learned a long time ago that anybody who wanted to avoid politics really has to dig a hole in the ground and just stick their head in it. If you're gonna be in this world and do a good job at what I do anyway, it has a political element. And so in many ways, that's my job all the time. And at any given point, I'm doing more of one of those things than another, but it always has those three elements.
And then the diagnostic lab, let's kind of go back to that decision-making process and how quickly you guys had to get this going. This is in the Oklahoma Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory on the Stillwater campus. And you had some equipment that you thought might be able to help, but what did those discussions look like?
Well, the discussions started from a variety of corners of the university. So maybe if it's okay, I'll give a little bit of a maybe not so well understood idea of what doing diagnostic testing means in 2020, because it's very different than just even a few years ago. Before we had the capacity to do genetic sequencing on a rapid scale and widely, that was almost seen as just science fiction just a few years back. But with the invention of some specialized equipment, you almost always hear it referred to as PCR machines. But it's the equipment that allows us to take tiny amounts of genetic material and make whole bunches of copies of it, so that we get enough of it to actually then identify what it is by identifying how it reacts with other chemicals. That's a very cryptic description of what a PCR machine does, but it sets off this chain reaction. That's actually the CR in PCR, chain reaction, that gives us enough stuff that then we can say what's in it. And so diagnostic testing a long time ago might have meant you're looking for certain kinds of symptoms, or you're looking for certain kinds of things in the blood that were big enough that you could put under a microscope and actually see them and say, yeah, it's shaped right and so forth. But nowadays, when we're doing diagnostic testing, we're actually getting down to the genetic level. What is the genetic sequence of this substance that we have a copy of here? So for that background, that kind of genetic analysis is relevant to sciences all over this campus. So we have people with PCR machines in plant and soil sciences in the agriculture division. We have them in the microbiology division. That makes perfect sense. But we have engineers that work with this kind of stuff. Okay, so we have people all over the campus whose expertise couldn't be more different from each other. And in their normal daily work, they're not diagnosing diseases. They're trying to figure out what this particular substance is in this root of this plant. But they're using those same tools. So when this crisis occurred and the public became aware of the need for much more testing capability than was out there, I started hearing from all over campus, hey, we've got PCR machines. Could these possibly be of any use? We don't know if our lab could be of any use, but if it could, we'll be happy to help. Hearing this from all around campus. And one of the places that we heard the same thing from was the Oklahoma Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory, or ODL as we call it for short, where they have certain brands of this equipment, certain, and here it is a little closer, because their actual work they do day in and day out is research on animal diseases, but then also diagnosing animal diseases, so that if a major swine producer is noticing an illness, they can bring in specimens and try to see what's going on. Is there a particular outbreak occurring? So that they do that kind of work all the time with animals, but they also had this equipment, had this expertise. So when I started hearing this from everywhere, then we started looking, well, what would be involved in putting this into play? And so several things that we discovered, that we would need a kind of certification level for being able to handle human specimens, that would be really hard to get, say, over in the plant and soil sciences laboratory.
Right.
The controls and the kinds of things that we would need would take us quite a while to get that certification. Even if we started today, it would be quite a while down the road. But with our animal disease laboratory, because they operate under USDA certification as a high-level animal disease laboratory, to be able to handle just about any animal disease that's known, and even human diseases that animals might be carrying, their processes, their controls, their certifications were already at a really high level. Then just by accident, it turns out that the equipment that they had, that they use every day in Odal, was the exact equipment that we were not in a national shortage for they call reagents. It's the chemicals that you need along with the specimens to actually do the tests. And so a lot of places had tests ready to go and equipment ready to go in their human labs around the country, but because everybody was trying to do it at the same time, the suppliers were running out of these reagents. Well, we happen to have this particular set of equipment that uses reagents. That you got the idea. So we were not in a shortage environment. So then could we get the certification? And that's where we partnered up with OSU Medicine, and because they have a diagnostic lab in Tulsa that is already certified. They call it CLIA certified. It's a boring little acronym, but it's the certification that is needed to do human testing. They had the expertise. They had an already approved medical director or clinical director of that. You're not allowed to have two labs that are different covered under the same certification. They can't be in two different places, but one person could be the director of multiple labs. So we partnered with OSU Medicine so that the clinical director would become the director, not of all of Odal from the standpoint of the animal testing, but just the clinical director for our CLIA certified human testing. And that expertise allowed that process to operate very fast. So we actually, within 48 hours of putting in our submission for approval for a certified lab, because we had Dr. Call over, and it was on loan to us from OSU Medicine in Tulsa, and we had such tight standard operating procedures and data controls and everything already in our lab because of being a USDA certified lab. They were able to certify us under CLIA very rapidly. And so then it was a matter of just getting the logistics worked out. I say just. We have had dozens and dozens of people working exclusively on ramping up the logistics of all of this. And luckily, we realized we would need that immediately, and we put a team in place to just handle the logistics so that our lab folks didn't have to quit being lab folks. They could keep their focus on doing their diagnostic testing, and in fact, even continuing to do the animal diagnostic testing that's needed, kind of separated off from the human testing. But they can keep their focus internal and let some of us on the outside support them and handle the logistics for standing this new piece up.
And that's very neat how it really was the Cowboy family coming together. You've got people from all different departments, from OSU CHS, and really making it work. I do want to remind everyone that I know this can be a complicated issue to understand. So we want people to be able to ask questions, and you can do that in the Zoom Q&A box or also on Facebook as well. And we will try to get those answered for you as we go along. So let's see, we talked a little bit about the partnership.
Just realized that my granddaughter is wearing her OSU cheerleader outfit. So I should have probably invoked that when I said the thing about being a cheerleader. But
I love that. That's so cute. How old is she?
Well, younger in that. Seven. My granddaughters are 7 and 3 right now, with a 5-year-old boy stuck between them.
Oh, well, that's so fun. That's so fun. Well, when we talk about the testing process and a diagnostic lab, I mean, I think a lot of people think like you're there swabbing people or however the process works, but that's not the case. Can you explain how it's different than like actually getting tested?
Yeah, this is the laboratory that analyzes specimens. And so the specimens come to us from a variety of different places around the state, directly from hospitals, but also directly from county health departments who have stood up, state health department and county health departments who have stood up these, they call them swab pods. But it's just an operation. Sometimes it's drive-through operations to have people come up and say, I think I need to be tested. There's different criteria that different places use. And then they actually administer or get the specimen from the person. Most everything we're dealing with now, although this is starting to shift as the CDC gives us guidance of what kinds of specimens we can utilize. But most everything that we're getting are what are called nasopharyngeal swabs, which is I think they're better thought about as brain swabs, because they go in through your nose and go quite a little ways. It's not the most comfortable experience you've ever had. If you have been tested with one of these and it was comfortable, they might not have done a good job on the swab. So I say brain swab, but they use the swab to get a specimen of nasopharyngeal liquid, and then that swab is enclosed in some kind of medium. Usually it's a liquid medium that preserves that person's specimen, and then those are put in a special bag that's designed to make sure that what's inside stays inside, and handed over to a courier. And the couriers then are operating all around the state and bringing those specimens to various points of analysis. And so the ones that are sent here arrive by courier. Now I can keep going, or I sort of answered your question. So we accept those specimens and do the analysis and determine is that a case of COVID-19 or not, and then push those results back out to those providers in a way that they, first of all, know whether that patient or that person tested positive or not, but then they also have the results in a method that can be incorporated into their medical records if they're a patient in a hospital or a patient of a particular provider. Does that make sense?
And it does. And then one thing that I thought was interesting, I mean, most employees aren't going to campus right now. I was able to go one day and see the diagnostic lab and taking all of those precautions. And you, from a distance, were explaining to me the difference between the clean side and the hot side of the lab. And it was interesting to see, in that hot side, they're in full gear. I mean, it almost looks like out of a space movie or something, those precautions they have to take.
Yeah. And that's where they're dealing with the raw samples. And honestly, most those protections are pretty high, but you can imagine the worst thing that could happen for an operation like this. Well, there's lots of ways something could go wrong if we were sloppy with it. Right. But we certainly don't want to have a situation in which our experts that we rely on to do this work wind up getting exposed themselves because they're handling these samples, these specimens. So all that work is done in a very chemically controlled way. And so that's what you referred to as the hot side of the lab, where we're dealing with the specimen itself. And so there's a two-stage process where we handle the actual specimen that could, if the person were infected, could be infectious, the sample itself, the specimen itself. So we're handling that in a very controlled way. And that stage, we're actually extracting the genetic material, doing that's the term for it. We're extracting it. So instead of now having nasal fluid, we have this tiny amount of the genetic material from that nasal fluid in a suspension medium that is innocuous. So now we have something that we don't have to treat like it could kill us. But we have to then transport that from the hot side of the lab over to the clean side. And that's where we do the chain reaction in a device that can tell us what that genetic material is. So it's a two-stage process where once we're over to the clean side, I mean, we're still taking the same precautions that the folks at home are taking wearing masks and social distancing and so forth, so that we're protecting people in that generic way, but they're no longer having to be protected from the specimen itself, because that's only genetic material at that point.
Have you ever seen anything like this, in your time leading research here at OSU, or has this just been a weird experience?
No, it's been one of these things where I almost think of it as like all the normal rules just don't apply. And by rules, in some ways that's true about rules, although there are some of the, we impose more rules on ourselves in some ways because of the importance of all of this. But the idea that we have to worry about, well, wait a minute, you're not my boss, that person's my boss, so I need to only spend my time doing that, that kind of parsing of technicalities, people just aren't doing. If they're needed and they can provide help, they're jumping in. And we're trying to keep track of all this. That's our logistics team and so forth that's helping us keep track of it. But I've got people who work in various roles in this university who are volunteering now, that their time as part of this lab work. They're doing things that are sometimes even just data entry, just doing things to make sure that we're keeping track of all this stuff. It's not anything like their normal job, and they're not complaining. Their bosses aren't complaining. This is an all hands on deck kind of event. And so in a sense, it's stressful, but in another sense, it's kind of promotes this sense of team that we all see ourselves pulling together for the greater good.
And research can normally be a slow process. You have to go through so many steps, and this just happened so quickly.
Well, and most of the time, our researchers, I was talking about solving a problem. Most of the time, they're solving a problem that everybody's known about for a while. And of course, we all like to make huge breakthroughs, but most scientists, quite honestly, live their lives as successful scientists without ever having what anybody on the outside would look at as a huge breakthrough. They're making incremental advancement of their field. So they're solving a problem that's never been solved before. And now that becomes a new ground for everybody else to work to solve the next problem. And it advances science in that really incremental way, which may not be sexy in that generic sense of the word, but it's how science progresses most of the time. And then every now and then there's the big breakthrough, and that's the ones that we like to talk about the most, because even politicians can understand them. So forgive that little aside. But the incremental stuff doesn't make good sound bites, but that's how most of it works. And most of the time you solve that problem, and then you have to convince everybody in your field that you've solved the problem. So that's our peer review process. So you send that piece of, you write it all up, send it off to a journal, a whole bunch of other people look at it, try to tear it apart, try to figure out why it really wasn't solved. And then if we all agree it was solved, that gets published, and that becomes the increment, and we keep that up. So that cycle takes a while, and there's all kinds of reasons that's there. But when we're doing something like this, where a researcher can take their skills and make a difference in somebody's life right now, tomorrow, they can make the state of Oklahoma safer this week by applying those skills, that becomes exciting in a whole different way. And certainly while we're doing this, we also have, not sure if you're wanting this or not, but we also have people looking at the bigger issues, the cures, the kinds of things that we will only learn by taking that slow process over time from this virus, from this pandemic. So we're actively planning research in some of our highest security labs. That we have the Oklahoma Center for Respiratory and Infectious Disease that's based at OSU. It has people from OU Health Science Center and OMRF as part of that collaborative, but it's based here. And so folks within that group are already planning the next sort of phase of coronavirus research that may or may not, they're not developing the vaccine for this one. They're laying the groundwork for what how can we be better prepared for the next pandemic? How can we be better prepared to establish and develop vaccines based upon a new outbreak so that we're not in the same position we're in now? So that planning for that next phase of research is going on as we speak.
Wow, that's awesome. I do want to get to a few of the audience questions that are coming in. So one from Suzanne, she asked, she would like to know more about the different roles that staff members have in the lab. What areas do you have them working in?
Yeah, well, and that's a little bit of everything. I mean, so we certainly have, as I mentioned, the data management. So some of that's data entry. Some of it is updating our database. I tried to think of a metaphor for what this is like. So imagine you've got 750 ping pong ball makers. Okay. And they all send us one ping pong ball in one little bag marked with, this came from Julia Benbrook's ping pong ball factory in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And 750 of them, they all come from different places. They're all in separate bags. We take those 750 ping pong balls and we have to get them out of the bag, create a record in a database that we got one from Julia, and we got one from Zach, and we got one from all these 750 different places. Then we have to get world-class ping pong players to individually play with each of those ping pong balls while we record the speed that they're going, and the characteristics of that ping pong ball. And then we have to get that into those results into computer. All the while, we never let those ping pong balls touch each other, and we never let those ping pong balls touch a person.
Okay.
And then we have to send results individually to all 750 of those different ping pong ball manufacturers about how their ping pong ball did. And we have to certify those results and be certain of them. That's what we're doing here. So the two expert ping pong ball players, maybe that's our team in the lab that's actually handling the specimens and doing that stuff in the spacesuits that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. But all the other people that are having to handle the computer aspect of this, how do we get that out to people so that they're not waiting weeks and weeks for their results? How do we make sure that we're keeping track so that we don't have Julia accidentally get the results for Zach's ping pong ball? Right. And so that's where our staff are involved. Now, again, in the Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab, they've got a team that's there that does this stuff every day for a much smaller volume of work. There just wasn't time to build that up slowly. We had to expand it rapidly. So in addition to the staff that we bring in to add to that, to the lab, I've got a whole other set of staff who are finding those people, making sure they have the proper training, because we're not talking about ping pong ball companies. We're talking about patient data, which we all want our data. When we're a patient, we want that protected and only handled by people who are properly trained and understand that they can't go home and talk about their, hey, I saw Julia Renbrook's COVID test today. Right. I mean, there's training involved, there's screening involved. And so we got a whole other team that are out there doing that. Then we've got the whole team that's managing the courier network and making sure we know what's coming from where and that it gets here. And then another team that's handling questions when we get questions coming in. So we have literally about 50 people who weren't working on this 2 weeks ago, working on various aspects of this. And maybe 40 of those are staff members, whereas the other 10 are graduate students or faculty who have specific expertise in the lab.
And then Andrew asked, are researchers worried about the, let's make sure I'm saying this right, zoonotic transmission of the virus to livestock?
Well, now, so a zoonotic transmission is the idea that something that comes from an animal could jump to a human. And so COVID-19 has already done that. It is now in the human realm. Researchers believe that it started completely in animals, and now that it's in the human realm. So the person might be referring to the reverse zoonotic possibility, that it can jump back to animals. We have certainly not seen any transmission of this with domestic animals or with agricultural animals. That's been studied quite a bit. There was one case of that got reported widely of a dog in Hong Kong early in this, that they found COVID-19 in some kind of sample from this dog, but it looks as if even in that case, the dog was not infected. The dog might have actually been licked its owner who was infected, and so had the virus in its mouth, but was not that virus didn't get into the dog's system. So we're not particularly worried about that from an animal perspective with COVID-19, but we're always worried about it with any kind of diagnostic testing. So again, even though the lab is set up to do animal testing, they have to have all precautions in place as if whatever is in that animal specimen could jump to humans. And that would be a horrible thing for that to happen in the lab. And so all the precautions are there. That's the case in all animal diagnostic labs that are USDA level 1, which ours is. So that concern's mitigated by that, but it's always a concern with any kind of pathogen that it goes from being worried about it only in animals to somehow making its way to human transmission.
I know we have just a few minutes left, but before I let you go, do you have time for other research right now? What does that look like at OSU, or has this taken over?
Well, no, believe it or not, there's quite a bit of research able to still go on. Now, there's a whole lot that just can't happen and be safe with the social distancing and hygienic procedures that need to be in place right now. So as you can imagine, any kind of research that involves interacting with other people directly, touching, being close to each other. So a lot of research in the social and human sciences really does involve that close personal contact. There's some kinds of research that involve taking blood, or basically anything that's invasive like that. If it's not COVID-19 related, it's not going on. But a lot of things that are laboratory-based research, it's often pretty spread out anyway. A lot of engineering research where you're figuring out how to build something, how to take something apart, how to put it together, how to make it work better, how to 3D print something that's never been 3D printed before. So a lot of that work is still going on with special precautions. Work that's done in the field, field biologists, for instance. We're very careful about the social distancing aspects. So we have some people doing some field work where two people who would normally hop in a truck together and go to the field to collect their data are driving separate vehicles and wearing masks and making sure they keep their personal distance while they're in the field, but the work is still able to go on. So there's a lot going on, whether it's the wheat research and so forth. There's things that we're cutting back on. We're changing the way we do it in the labs. We're making sure there aren't too many people so that personal distance can be there for the labs that are still working. And the cleaning schedule for what we normally do in a lab. Labs need to be clean anyway, but normally if you clean your lab space before you start your shift, maybe the next person cleans it again before they start theirs. We double up on that. So I clean before I start, I clean when I finish. You walk in later, you clean before you start, you clean, those kinds of special precautions, but still going on.
So if it's safe to do, we're still doing it.
It's very much consistent with kind of the safer at home stance that our state has. If we can do it safely and the folks are comfortable in that environment, the employees are comfortable in that environment, then it can happen. If it's unsafe, then we shut it down. And we have instances where some of our work is very much dependent upon the involvement of students who just aren't here. And so that work winds up being shut down, not because it would be unsafe, but because the students are at home doing their coursework from a distance.
And then one more, Phyllis wants to know if you're testing for the active virus or the antibodies or both.
We are testing for the virus only. It's a very different kind of test to test for the antibodies. And there's a lot going on right now in the news media about antibody testing. Antibody testing it has a very important role to play in potentially mapping how this virus has penetrated in society, particularly in folks who aren't symptomatic. So to find out maybe if you had the virus, even though you never got sick, an antibody test might be very useful. But there's too much unknown right now about how quickly we develop antibodies, and the best research suggests that we could be infected and contagious before we have the antibodies. So a negative antibody test you could get a negative result on an antibody test from someone who is infected and contagious. So to diagnose a person, the scientific community right now are all in agreement, you need a genetic test, and we are doing the genetic testing.
Well, thank you so much for everything you're doing and for taking time to talk with us, because I know you are a busy man right now, and everything the Diagnostic Lab is doing, it's really cool for OSU to be a part of, not only helping Oklahoma, but helping the pandemic nationwide, worldwide, and looking for cures in that process. So thank you so much, Dr. Sewell. And then I do have a few things I want to remind our viewers that are listening. We want to remind you to visit the new Cowboy.Family website. That's where you can find opportunities to support current OSU students through scholarships and emergency funds, as well as the OSU Center for Health Sciences, which is leading the charge against COVID-19 in Oklahoma. Friday with the Family will be back next week. This is one of my favorite parts of the week. I hope it's yours as well, and I hope you'll join us. That's always at 3:30 on Friday, and we will be talking with Mark Blakeman from the McKnight Center for the Performing Arts. So if you have any questions for him, be thinking ahead, and we'll be talking about how all of this has impacted them and when they'll be back up and doing things. And you'll find a link to register for that on Cowboy.Family website. So as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and go Pokes.